Go for Leadership, the podcast with Daniel and Gert.
Hello and welcome for today's Go for Leadership podcast series. My guest today is Carson.
Go for Leadership interviews.
Brendan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's so great to be here, Daniel.
Awesome. Brendan, like always, give me a quick introduction of yourself. Who are you and why we are speaking today?
Carson. So I'm currently the Vice President of Learning and Leadership at Walmart. I've been in this career for 25 years now, so almost a quarter of a century as a training practitioner, and started my career in Silicon Valley, where I spent most of my adult life, and then migrated to Atlanta, where I've been here the last 7 years, where I had stints at Home Depot, Delta, and now Walmart, where I will be moving to Bentonville shortly. So all my profession has really been in helping to train the workforce at the companies I've worked with. So it's been a great career. I've loved it, every minute of it.
Awesome. I think that's a great starting point, in particular with the idea of the podcast, right? So we treat about leadership and skills around that. So maybe you can give me your view. What is your definition, or what is your idea about leadership?
No, that's good. That's great. And a good question. For me, leadership requires passion, vision, and values. And so that's kind of how I look at leadership just in general. Passion is the foundation, I think, for good leadership, because you need to be dedicated to the people you lead. You're building their capability, you're developing them, you're lifting them up, and you're inspiring them. So you need that passion for people to connect to the passion you have for what you do and your team and your organization does. Vision, which provides the direction that you lead your people in. It's a guide for people to follow. And people, as we know, need that. They need a good understanding of where they're going. And basically, that vision is painting the picture, if you will, of what the ideal state is for the team and the organization. And then values, I think, are really important as well, because they're how you operate, and values are what binds you all together into the culture in which you function. But your values as a leader aren't necessarily the same as the company's values. Company values usually relate to the organizational mission and vision. It's essential that employees also share your personal values to a certain extent, because that drives engagement, and that's key for a leader as well.
I like that. And I think that's always a very inspiring moment for me, because everybody has a same but also a very different definition of leadership. Now, with all your experience about also developing good leaders and giving, let's say, traits to leaders to become great leaders, how would you define a great leader? What does a great leader, let's say, has for you?
I would say, just a little bit about myself and into leadership, which will help sort of tell that story a bit. I advanced into my first level leadership role and then into more senior roles pretty quickly, and in some respects a little too early because I didn't have a lot of, quote, training. In some situations, a lot of leaders find themselves in those roles because they were good at what they were doing and the work they were doing, and they looked like they were great leaders from other leaders, right? And so they put you into leadership roles a lot of times without a lot of advanced understanding of, are these capabilities that you can grow into or that you have? Because you're not born a leader. You really have to be developed into being a good leader. So I moved into some roles pretty quickly, took on some responsibility, but I wanted more responsibility too, as a strategist and as a leader. So I was ambitious in that respect, and I sort of felt like it was a good spot for me to help lead and to lead others. But then I sought a role that was somewhat of a stretch for me, and I found someone that was willing to take a chance on me, and that's a critical component of moving yourself into a different type of role as a leader is looking for someone who sees something in you and willing to give you that stretch. And that's a key theme, I think, of truly what can make someone a good leader is, first, another leader mentored and coached me into being a more effective leader. And since then, I've always thought that the best leaders were coaches. And so I would think one of the biggest attributes of leadership, definitely in my experience as a leader, especially during the pandemic, when I was working at an airline, there's nothing I can do as a leader that's more impactful to both the individuals on my team and the organization in which I lead than to serve as a coach. And so I think that's the most important characteristic of a leader, because a good coach will let the employee's own best ideas come to the surface. They'll listen longer than just offering a solution up front, right? I had someone tell me once, don't go into the room thinking you already have all the answers. Listening is really good. Listening more than speaking, frankly. And the solutions that you let your team find through coaching them instead of just being directive and telling them tend to be more authentic and durable. So I would say the most impactful types of leaders are leaders that are coaches. And you can see it in the sports world, right? How we tend to really respect winning coaches a lot, right? So.
I like your view, and I think it's absolutely right. How, in particular, in this difficult and challenging world we are in, or maybe any other situation where you can get into as a leader, how you can be prepared, or what is your view? How can leaders become prepared to cope with such challenging, let's say, situation that you may even have no answer for?
Well, I'll tell you, last year, during the pandemic, we didn't have a playbook for that. I was at an airline in 2019, the year before the pandemic unleashed. That was the busiest travel season, the busiest travel year in recorded history. I mean, more people in the world moved around than at any other time. And so it was a challenging year, but it was a great year because people were traveling and moving around the world. And then when the pandemic unfolded, that all just stopped almost overnight, Daniel. It was amazing. And I've never been in a business before where we had to put it to rest. And 97% of the revenue just disappeared almost overnight. And so we definitely had some defining moments as leaders during that time. And I will shout out, it was Delta Airlines I worked at. I will shout out our senior leadership team because they were fantastic. They were very open and honest and forthcoming immediately about the stakes and the situation and the really exceptionally difficult decisions that they were facing, and bringing the leaders together of the organization and coaching us through that experience to help us with our teams, right? And help us communicate and figure it out, because it was like hour by hour for quite some time during that. But a few moments stand out from that. And the challenge for this, for all organizations as they develop leaders, the challenge is if you don't have a bench of good leaders, then when the crisis does come, that's a problem for you because they're not prepared. And I know lots of corporations spend a lot of effort and significant amounts of time on developing their leaders. But are you really asking the right questions about what you're doing as you develop folks, right, to be leaders? A few moments stood out from last year. We were faced with the stakes and risks of the situation. They were exceptionally large. The outcomes potentially had a major impact almost of every decision we were making, because we didn't know day to day what would be happening for the longest time. we were in a situation where we were an essential service to the nation. So we had to continue to operate, but at the same time, we didn't have near the amount of customers that we had before. So how would we, navigate that without massive layoffs or adverse impact on our employees? But then how would we maintain our ability to survive, right? And so the stress and tension was way high. So it was an experience that I wouldn't say I would want to go through again, but it did teach me a lot about leading through crisis. And again, I go back to that coaching aspect of being a leader, and some of the reflection I've done during that year or after that year was really asking myself, okay, what did I do right? What do I wish I would have done differently? What do I wish I would have been able to do ahead of time? And then I think about some of those actions that I took and, reflect back on what was my enduring lesson? What are the lessons I learned from that experience that I'm taking forward? And, I think that the number one thing is I definitely don't see my job as a leader, like I said earlier, as just directing people to get the work done. That's not it. I really felt like a lot of my experience during that year as a leader was really about just helping people navigate the complexity of what was happening in the world, in our communities, and then in our, families and all of that. And so those are going to the values, going to the passion for people, and going to the vision, are really the things that I leaned on during that year. And I would argue that we all, we're all in learning in HR, or those of us that are, we really need to focus on what is your bench, how deep is your bench for effective leadership in not only the good times. It's easier, frankly, to lead through the good times than it is those challenging times. So.
When you think of all your experience and how you develop, let's say, good leaders, in particular, you mentioned to stay passionate, let's say, to connect people, to foster, let's say, a certain vision, but also to create values and maybe also a culture of an organization. What are the main aspects that you see or the main traits that someone would need maybe as a younger age with your own experience that you said? What traits would you recommend? What learning experience an organization should prepare in order to create good and great leaders like you described?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different ways to look at it. And of course, lots of companies have really great programs. And, I've worked on several of the types of programs in some of the companies that I've worked at for different ways to develop leadership. I think you can boil it down into some simple things, though. And a lot of times we make this more complex than it needs to be. One, I think you've really got to have an intentional selection system that's based on the leader expectations that you have. So you've come together as an organization, and this is the cultural aspect, right? You've decided that this is what we expect of anyone who leads in this organization. So you have to really have a concerted effort to bring that together and to nod everyone's heads that, need to agree on that and accept those and not have a ton of them. Make that can be simple. 3 to 4 expectations you have of leaders so that it's sticky and everyone can grab hold of that, right? And then candidly, you need to find leaders, especially in today's world. You need to identify some key attributes. How well can they communicate? How good are they at storytelling and being able to bring people together in a shared mission, right? And how are they able to connect what they do, what they expect their teams to do, to the values of the company? I strongly believe in, values-based leadership. And then some key attributes along with those are curiosity and persistence and courage. So I think, and Eric Schmidt said this when he was chairman of Google, he hires for two things: persistence and courage. And especially in today's world, we need leaders who can have a strong point of view, can be persistent in not persistent in necessarily trying to advance their own point of view, but persistent in the ability to advocate and champion for the people they lead, but also for the organization's mission and vision. And there's a great book on this that really, I think everyone should take a look at. Simon Brown, who's a friend of mine, he's a CLO at Novartis, wrote a book called The Curious Advantage. And a good leader, again, talking about leaders as coaches, a good leader is themselves curious, but they're able to instill curiosity in the people that they do lead. And that's critical in today's world, because good leaders open their team up to innovate and co-create, and they really only do that when they're curious. And so it's almost a skill that a good leader can help instigate among their team.
I like that. Now you worked for so many different companies as well, with different, let's say, type of businesses, the Home Depot, Delta, now Walmart. Do you see there any difference, let's say, of leadership or leadership style also required in order to succeed in these different, let's say, areas or companies?
I mean, there are some consistent attributes, I think, across any type of industry or vertical that people may be in. As a learning expert, I feel like I've been able to, started out in technology, where I spent most of my time in tech companies, and then in retail, and then in the transportation space. There are some consistent, attributes that good leaders carry with them wherever they go, right? And I think really, if you're people focused, because we as leaders, especially in our space where we're in learning and development, we're in HR, we are the ones that are really more focused on the people. And so I think you really need to have a focus on helping others, developing others. I mean, that's a consistent attribute across the board. If you're just in it for yourself, then you're going to have a challenging time, especially in different types of organizations. I think a lot of companies like to speak about their cultures being like a family. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important that the leader can draw some familial correlations in some respects in how they lead, because you want to get to know your people really well. And you want to spend time with them, and you want to understand them. So I think some of those, that attribute across the board will carry you as a leader. Effective communication, collaboration, understanding how to not only formulate a vision for where you need to go as a team, but also being able to help those that are on your team be able to execute on that vision. Strategy is great, but your team has to actually execute on that as well. So I think, being able to have that conversation and tell that story and get people to really be motivated to want to go in that direction that you're setting the vision for, that's critical. I think if you have those types of capabilities, you're going to do fine as a leader.
Awesome. I mean, I think all industries, of course, has their the tipping point moment, right? You mentioned that in the airline industry, of course, COVID was kind of an overnight, let's say, crisis mode. So in particular, in this difficult, challenging times where you need to, let's say, change a complete company, also literally overnight, change the mode of operation, the modus operandi. How do you unleash motivation at the workforce to, let's say, overcome such a complete crisis in your view?
Well, I had a leader at the last company I was at during COVID, tell me, is just sort of talking about one of the moments, right, that we were dealing with some pretty heavy decision making. And, he's like, we have to really be bold. And this is a moment that we have to step up and figure this out. We were literally in the mode of trying to save the airline, save the company. And you have those stark moments during that time where what matters most is the people that your decisions that you're making or the decisions you're making are impacting their lives. And you can see that, you can literally see that. And, so you've got to be able as a leader, and especially in moments of confusion or chaos or crisis, or just even when the times are really, causing you to have to make some impactful decisions, regardless of whether it's like a global crisis, that kind of thing. You've got to be able to ask powerful questions. You've got to, like I said earlier, engage in active listening. You've got to be free of distractions. You've got to clear your head to be able to focus on what's in front of you. It's key to challenge assumptions. You've got to always be aware of the broader issue, the bigger picture, but you sometimes have to hone in on those nuances or the more granular aspects of things that, especially if they're impacting, individuals, and really know the next action. Like, what are the steps people need to take? That's really critical. Like, what they need to do and by when. You've got to have that accountability. You have to affirm accountability. Be willing to accept feedback, especially in the moment. But, I would say be a guide, not a director necessarily. Those are some of the things that are really critical and important. And it was for us as we were going through that year. But you can translate those to kind of your everyday practice too, as a leader, because, everyone, you're very visible. And people are looking at you obviously through different lenses, and there's a certain, and you'll figure it out with the organization you're in, the culture you're in, but how you carry yourself and how you bring yourself and how you model the type of leader you want to be, and those are all important things for leaders to focus on.
I think you also mentioned one aspect that I very like, in particular. Do you also agree that it's very essential to, let's say, bring in the team to find, let's say, to make it as part of the solution instead of making it part of the problem in order to cope with that challenging times?
Yeah, no, you're right. I think that especially in times like last year, what a lot of our senior leaders did, including the CEO, Ed, he brought us into the conversation. So there was that one aspect of being very directive and, sharing with us kind of, here's what we need to be thinking about right now. Here are the things we're going to do to focus on, one, your safety as employees of this company, our customer safety, and then like our communities around us in which we operate, all the things we can do there. Some of the first things he had us do, since customers weren't necessarily flying the airline like they had before, how can we lend our expertise in our planes and all of that to healthcare workers who needed to move around to the hotspots, right? So we flew people, the healthcare workers around, and oh, by the way, there's some Americans were locked down. They got locked down when countries locked down. They were in foreign countries, and so can we go get them and bring them back? So at his level and as a great leader, he was thinking about what can we do to make sure our communities, our people, our customers are safe, right? And what do we need to do there? And so I think sometimes you have to take that broader vision. But he brought us into these conversations, and he shared with us all those things going on, while at the same time making those more tactical decisions on cost out. The first thing was like, okay, how do we cost out? How do we not be burning cash every day, at least as little as we would have to keep the airline operating? So those kinds of decisions, 24/7 is critical kind of aspect. But, what he evoked in us, though, and emanated was a sense of purpose, right? So our purpose we had a mission statement for the company, but when that became not really focused necessarily on our customers, it became the mission for us just as a company to survive, right? So we were able to take what he was telling us and understand how we had a purpose going forward, right? And that's the best thing that in times like that a leader can give you, is a purpose for you showing up every day and helping you make the decisions you need to make about your role you can play in the organization. We were asked, hey, can you take unpaid leaves of absence? Can you give back some of your time off? These types of things. What are you willing to do to help us get through this crisis, right? And so then we had that sort of shared accountability and responsibility as employees to come together and figure out what we needed to do to help the company. You're not going to get that unless you have leaders who can share that vision and tell the story the right way to make you feel like, and for you to see how your contribution can help. And I learned so much from him in just watching, and even the leaders around him during that year, on setting clear expectations, telling us and sharing the higher purpose that we had, and helping to keep us as motivated as possible during a time like that, and sharing with us the impact that we could have by working together and paying it forward exponentially for the company. And they're coming out of it. It's hard to say if they're coming out of the pandemic right now because we have all these variants going around and some new stuff happening, but coming out of that, we were coming as a stronger organization.
And I think you also mentioned that, and in particular in these difficult times where you are, let's say, not in your comfort zone, it's the time when you most learn, right? I mean, you need to be spot on. You need to find solutions with your team. So I very like the way you reacted on the pandemic, which is, I mean, it's still on, right? It's not over yet.
It was a challenge. I lost half of my team because they offered retirement packages and strongly encouraged people to really think about, what they, is it time for you to retire? Have you, we had a lot of tenure on the team. And so it was a great package and a lot of folks took the package. But we also had that sort of shared understanding that sacrifices are needed. And if some of us sacrifice, I mean, I took a couple off unpaid, and several people on my team did. It's funny how the learning teams are always the ones that are willing to sacrifice. But we did that to give back, and I don't want to sound too sanctimonious here, but, we knew that together we were much stronger in this than if we were just in it for ourselves. And those moments don't emanate from nowhere, right? That comes from a shared sense of purpose. And so you don't get that overnight if, like I said earlier, if you don't have good leaders who are able and capable and willing to steer you through these rough waters. If you don't have that to begin with, you're not going to be able to navigate those types of crises or tough moments. And you could even say that on the other side of things when it's not crisis, but it's just uncertainty, volatility, and maybe it's even sort of the rapid transformation that's going on. If you don't have leaders capable and with the capacity to navigate you through their teams and the organizations through those types of moments, then it's too late when they're already happening, right? And you can look at some of the best organizations out there, the ones that are doing the best, not just from a revenue standpoint, but from a customer or an employee satisfaction standpoint. You look around and it's because they have good leadership. And so that's where we need to be investing more and differently in leader development, and we need to be thinking a little bit beyond the box, if you will, on how we develop great leaders. And then a lot of organizations should open their doors a bit and share some of what they're doing with other organizations as well when it comes to this.
Awesome. Brendan, like usually I finish up with the question, what you have told the younger Brandon, or what has been the advice that you have told the younger Brandon when he started his career as a leader?
Well, I didn't plan this career. This is not what I thought. I'd be in a rock band playing bass guitar.
Wow.
So I went in completely the opposite direction. But, what I would look back, and I've had a wonderful career, I would just say, what I said earlier, life is terribly short. So make sure you're living every moment the best life you can, and just keep your head up, pay your bills, don't be in debt, and just move forward, and that's what my dad told me when I was young. So I've tried to stick with that, and it's helped through my career and my life. So
awesome,
what I would say.
Go for Leadership, the podcast with Daniel and Gert.
Thank you so much for being our guest today. It has been a real pleasure having you as a guest.
Oh, thank you, Daniel. Appreciate being here.
Go for Leadership, the podcast.